Frank, you know, what frustrates me is the people in my generation, the boomers in my generation, forget the people that we grew up with.
Right.
Bro, we grew up in the late 60s and early 70s. Do you know what we had? We had hippies, we had vagrants, we had potheads, we had LSD. I mean, all of those people. Did you forget that we had those people?
Right.
There's this amnesia about what we went through. Hey, here we are, finally. After all these conversations, all the times that we've talked about starting a podcast, we've finally done it. Here we are, next Sunday.
Next Sunday. I like the name.
Don't you like that name?
That's
Isn't
good.
that cool? Next
It's not
Sunday.
this Sunday.
No, not this Sunday.
Not
Right.
this Sunday.
Not this
Absolutely
Sunday.
not this Sunday.
Not this Sunday. But when?
Next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
Next.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So I'm here with my friend Frank Beeler, Jim Shepard here. We're starting. This is going to be a lot of fun for us. Really, what we're trying to do here is just to recreate a lot of the conversations you and I have had sitting in my office. When we sit there and just chop it up and talk about stuff, and we have a good time, and we're hoping everybody else will have a good time listening to the stuff that we chop it up when we talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is, Jim, I come in your office, we sit down and talk. I ask a couple questions, and you drop these truth bombs and insight and wisdom and tell me fun stories and just bring me up to speed. And then every once in a while, I hopefully add some value. But I tell you, I just love it. I love getting to spend time with you. And I think it's not fair that I get to spend so much time with you, and I think the world needs to get to do that. So next Sunday is a chance for us to do that. So,
well, your gift is you know where to press all the buttons. You know how to get me started. So that's why you were the natural for the co-host. You watch kind of my eyes, and you're like, oh, I got him going now. I got him going now. I punched a button, and I can get him going. So that's what we're going to do here.
For sure.
You know, you got a lot of stuff to add. You do have a ton of stuff to add. I don't know anybody who understands the local church better than you do.
That's kind.
The context, you know, all the nuance. I think everybody gets kind of the obvious things, but you sat in the seat of a rapidly growing major mega church, and you sat on the executive team. You sat in that room. My favorite line from Hamilton, you sat in the room where it happened.
Yeah, where it happened.
We're not going to sing that, not today. We'll sing that some other episode.
I will never sing that. But maybe I could convince you to do that.
But that's
Jim.
what I love is that, you know, we bring kind of different things, and that's where our conversations are so good in my office, is that I bring a context and you bring a context, and when we mix it up, hopefully this will be great for the people that we're going to be talking to.
Yeah, I hope to. I hope so too. We just want to serve churches and see how we can help people go further, faster, make a difference. So, okay, so for next Sunday, we were talking about, okay, what was the first episode? What would we talk about? All the things that you know around the idea of generosity and kingdom impact and all the experience we've had in church world with all the church we've got to interact with. Where do we start when we think next Sunday? And honestly, it may be in an unexpected place for some people, because what people don't realize is your level of connection and impact with a new young generation of leaders. And you are observing firsthand the struggle the church is having in connecting with these young leaders, empowering these leaders. And so I thought maybe this first episode would just unpack some of the things that you're seeing in this space with this new generation that's raising up, and maybe even address some of the misconceptions that we're seeing about this generation. So before we get too far in, let's define generation. So when we say millennial, when we say Gen Z, what kind of age range and time frames are we talking about here? Just to make sure we're on the same page of what young people we're talking about and leaders.
I love that, Frank, because it never ceases to amaze me when I say Gen Z or millennial, and I ask somebody, what age is that? And they miss it.
Young,
and I was
young
like, are y'all not even paying attention? Yeah,
Right.
they're next gen, you know.
Right.
They're next gen,
Next
you
gen.
know. So Gen Z is kind of the younger generation. They're coming up. They're just starting to get through college. They're, you know, roughly, you know, 12 to 22, roughly. Your millennials are going to be somewhere between, you know, the younger millennials are going to be kind of in your mid-20s into mid-30s, maybe even upper 30s. You pick up with Gen X is going to be right there at kind of the, you know, right. You're kind of
40-somethings.
Yeah.
I'm on the line.
Yeah, you're on the
I
line.
want to claim to be a millennial
I know you
because
do.
there was
you
that
do.
one report that one time that said that I made the cutoff by like 6 months.
Yeah.
So I claim to be a millennial, even though every other report says I'm a Gen X.
I know. Yeah. For me, I'm a hardcore boomer, so thinking that I might be Gen X, I mean, there's no math that would get me there. Yeah. I mean, state of mind might get
carry
me there,
the one, maybe subtract a 0.
Oh, there we go. Gen X are going to be that group that are really flourishing in the church right now. They're old enough, young enough, kind of you're on the young side of that group, all the way up into their, kind of their mid 50s.
Yeah, mid to upper 50s.
Maybe even upper 50s.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And then boomers are going to be that group in kind of the upper 50s, early 60s, all the way up to like 75 or so. And then the older generation is kind of, the ones that are beyond that. So when we speak generationally, that's what we're talking about.
I love that. That's great insight. Gives good context for all this. Now, here's why I love this episode. You are uber passionate about Gen Z. You're seeing these young leaders. You're hanging out with them all the time. It amazes me that you're at any given day hanging out with some large church somewhere or some denomination helping shape their conversations around stewardship and leadership and giving or whatever it may be. And then the next thing I know, you're camping with a bunch of Gen Zers or off in the mountains doing something. You love it. And it feels like all of our conversations drift to this generation. So from the broader level, why are you so passionate? Because there's a gap, Jim. I love you, but there's a gap in age between where you're at and these Gen Zers coming up. It's real. Like undeniably real.
I'm twice as old
right?
as a lot of them.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So why the swing? A lot of people, when they get twice as old as a generation, just kind of point their fingers, say those young whippersnappers, they don't understand and they're messing up what we built. That's the opposite of the conversations that you have with me and the passion that comes out when you're talking about this generation. So where does that passion come from, that excitement to serve this generation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's 2 or 3 places it comes from, Frank. One of them is a frustration with my generation. Okay. A frustration with my generation and I would say an unwillingness to embrace the fact that we're going to start having to pass the baton to younger leaders, right? And all the things that I hear people in my generation say, well, they're not old enough, they're not more experienced enough, they might fail. It's like, come on, bro, at 28, you didn't know anything either, and you got promoted. Somebody trusted you, right? Come on. And so just forgetting where you were when you were that age, and I see it a lot in my generation. It's very frustrating to me. The passion for the next generation is really came out of, I think, it wasn't a moment, but I think it was a season right around when I turned 60. I started thinking less about what I can build and more about what I can leave behind. Right. So when you're young, when you're trying to get stuff done, as a company owner and building, you're just thinking about what you can build. But that shift started to hit me. What can I leave behind? And honestly, Frank, I didn't realize it at the time. I think the more I think about it, the more I realize having grandchildren really impacted me for that. It kind of changed my heart for the next generation in a way that I wasn't even aware of at the time. And so I started developing this real passion to help them make them better. I mean, I feel like I've paid $10 million in dumb tax that I don't want somebody else to have to pay. So when I'm spending time around these leaders, the list of things that I feel like I've done really well is about this long. The list of things that I've fouled up is, I don't have arms long enough. Yeah. And so that's what I want to talk to the young leaders about, is to say, don't do this, don't do that. Because so much of that stuff seems intuitively right, but it ends up going wrong. And if I can help you not do that, then my whole goal is I want to make you a better 26-year-old than I was, a better 31-year-old than I was, a better 35-year-old than I was, because I can help you do that, right? And so my passion really, and then here's the other thing, kind of connected to my grandkids. This was never a part of my motive. It was never a part. I realized this after the fact. I'm speaking into the lives of the people who are going to pastor my grandchildren.
Oh, that's wow. That's
powerful. Can pastor my grandchildren. Yeah. And so, at the end of the day, I do kind of have a vested interest in this, and I want to see these people flourish, and I want to see them thrive, and I want to see the church really just advance mightily with this next generation, because I know that the people in my generation have got to be handing these batons off so these younger leaders can do that. So
that is fantastic. I love the idea of saying, hey, you're raising up the pastors and leaders and equipping the pastors and leaders of your grandkids. That's a powerful statement and idea. idea. And so why wouldn't you sow into that and be intentional? And one of the reasons I think that leaders avoid sowing into this generation is, they've made some dumb mistakes, or they're young. Of course, once again, to your point, somebody took a risk on them 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so you have that. But then also with every generation, there's a fashion style change. There's a music style change. And there's all these other kind of cultural shifts that become off-putting or unfamiliar. And so it feels like there's a barrier there that's just because the haircuts are a little different. And I know this is silly to say, but it's like, I don't know how to relate. And it's like, no. We're talking church leadership. We're talking about sharing our mistakes.
Totally.
And when you highlight that with me time and time again, that you're not trying to tell them what you've done right. You're trying to help them avoid some of the things that you've done wrong. You never run out of good content for that, right? We've got plenty of mistakes.
I got plenty of content on that one.
And so I love that idea when it comes to you helping church leaders that are listening to this podcast right now or watching it online, the idea that you're just encouraging them to say, hey, just help them avoid some of the stuff that you dealt with. You're worried about. Oftentimes, church leaders are worried about what can we get out of them? When can they level up, make better decisions? It's like, no. Like, let's just help them avoid the stuff that we did wrong.
Totally.
And that's a great place to start. And when you and I have conversation in your office, that's what happens. You're sharing with me, man, I've tried to help this young man. I've seen that face before. I've seen you. You have one young man that you're mentoring right now. He's an Enneagram 8. You're an Enneagram 8. And he's like, your 8 side is showing strong right now.
Frank, that guy, he is not just an 8. He's a clone of me. And it spooks him that I can finish his sentences. And he's like, bro, it's creepy being around you because you finish my thoughts before I finish them. And I was like, you are the 31-year-old that I was. And if I can help you from being the dumb 31-year-old that I was, then that's a gift for me.
Absolutely. And that posture, Jim, it is, if I could just be hot take for a second, that posture is missing in the local church. That I just want to serve you and help you do this. It feels like when there's these misconceptions out there and we're speaking about future generations, oftentimes we're talking about from the context of what they're unwilling to do or not doing in the church. And what we find is that some of those are just flat out misconceptions. So let's press in there. You've gotten close to some of these generations, but these younger leaders, but you've also done the research. I know you've gotten close to some of the Barna data and other research that's out there. From church leaders' perspective, what are some of the misconceptions for this younger generation when it comes to their willingness to serve and give and connect and lead and be a part of the church? Because the narrative is, they're leaving the church, they're not engaged, they're not giving. A lot of times that's what we're hearing.
Oh, yeah.
But the research is saying something different in a lot of ways. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so, this is a hot topic for me, and I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I'm going to try to condense them today so we don't go, way too long on this. But
welcome to next Sunday, the 6-hour podcast. No, we're going to keep this to about 30 minutes.
First episode, 6 hours. The rest of them will be shorter.
That's exactly right.
Win you over.
That's right. Win you over with the 6-hour
6-hour podcast.
Okay, let's focus. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
So here's what I think you have to start with, Frank, and this is part of the understanding. All right, and this is Jim's take on this. All right, you've heard me say this before. What we're watching in so much of the church today is an expression of the church that came about in 1980. Two men. Yeah. Bill Hybels, Rick Warren, and others, but those are the notable ones, created this new expression of the church that worked for a long, long time. But it was built by boomers for boomers. Yeah. I think it's unrealistic to expect that it's going to have a lot of lifespan beyond boomers. And so what happens is we're frustrated because they don't take to the expression of the church that, in my opinion, wasn't built for them in the first place. You follow where I'm going? Absolutely. And so we've got to begin to rethink church. And I don't know that it's a radical shift, but it is a shift because we can't keep expecting them to like the things that I like. They're not my age, right? And so That's part of what I think is going on. We talk about the nuns, the disaffiliated, all the others. Frank, you know what frustrates me is the people in my generation, the boomers in my generation, forget the people that we grew up with.
Right.
Bro, we grew up in the late 60s and early 70s. Do you know what we had? We had hippies, we had vagrants, we had potheads, we had LSD. I mean, all of those people. Did you forget that we had those people?
Right.
We had entitled people, we had lazy people, all the descriptors that boomers are putting on millennials and Gen Z today. We had those kinds of people in our day.
You sound a little fired up about this.
Did I sound a little fired up
about
that?
A little fired up about this.
That's that frustration with my generation because they don't look around and realize that. There's this amnesia about what we went through. 68 to 73, man, that's when I was in high school and college.
Yeah.
And those years were turbulent years. They were crazy years. Crazy years.
So despite that truth that we've got this generation and the nuns and all the stuff, and we haven't necessarily crafted church the right way for them. To your point, we've created boomers for boomers kind of church, and we haven't rethought church properly, and we need to continue to work on that.
Yeah, that's right.
Despite that,
that's right.
We are seeing fascinating things in a very practical level, even when it comes to these young leaders giving in the local church.
That's right.
To an expression that doesn't match what maybe they would prefer or want or appeal. We're hearing, oh, they're disengaging, they're disconnecting, they're not willing to participate, whether it be through giving or serving. Mm-hmm. But some recent research is pushing back on that, even though it's not an expression for them. Is that right?
Yeah, that's totally right, Frank. And that's what I think really speaks into this. So I'll be sitting with a pastor talking with him about generosity development in his church. And, well, you know, we got all these young families coming, Jim. Well, you know how they are. And so I played dumb for a minute. And I let him tell me, you know, well, you know, they don't give and they do this. And I was like, well, Pastor, I hang around with a lot of these young people. And the things that you're saying are not things that I've witnessed personally.
Yeah.
You know, my observational evidence is different than what you're describing here. I know churches that have young families that have thriving giving. Mm-hmm. And so anecdotally, I had all these things that I didn't know they were right, but in my spirit, I felt like they were right, which is kind of, for me, that's kind of like knowing it's right? I've convinced myself it's true. Nobody else does that but me, I'm sure. But I just knew that it was, so when the Barna research came out, you know, we being in generosity, when they do the state of the church as regards generosity, we're going to be a part of that.
Sure.
So I was a part of the big reveal, the whole deck. It's now, you know, 5 or 6 books. They released it in segments, but they released the whole deck. And they went around the room for the ones of us who were in the room, and they said, what stands out to you in this? There were 2 slides that stood out for me, Frank. 2 slides immediately stood out, and they confirmed everything that I knew and had seen about the younger generation. First of all, the question said, in the last 12 months have you given to a charitable organization, including a house of worship? And so when you peg that by generation, we left out Gen Z and the elders. We felt like they were outliers on different ends of the spectrum. Gen Z hasn't fully moved into the workforce, you know, and the older.
Some of them were 11 years old, so that
exactly.
would distort the numbers.
We were just comparing millennials, Gen X, and boomers. Okay, so when you look at the participation rate, they were roughly the same. They were within 1 or 2 points, and the margin of error was 3. So that means there's no discernible difference in how much they give to charitable organizations. And so when I showed that slide to pastors will say to me, well, Jim, that doesn't actually surprise me. They like to give to all those nonprofits and all those social causes and all those other things out there. And I'm like, hold on, Pastor, let me show you the next slide. And the next slide is the one that I tell pastors, you need to have your seatbelt buckled and have your feet on the ground when I show you this one, because I'm about to show you something that no one in my generation believes unless they've seen this slide before. And here's what it is. That when you looked at the who gives to a church, so the question is, who gives to a church? Boomers, 31%.
Okay.
Gen X, 36%.
Okay.
Millennials, 42%.
Hey, wow.
42%. Now, get that. So let's just say, Frank, if it's research, let's use the full margin of error. Let's take the 42 down to 39.
Okay.
Let's take the 31 up to 34. So we're giving them the full benefit of being completely outside the margin of error on both sides. We're still 5 points apart.
So what you're saying is millennials, based on this study, are giving at a frequency, not an amount level,
correct.
But a frequency level.
That's right.
More than the other generations.
It's clear. It was very clear.
I mean, very clear.
Now, the dollars are probably different, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, you and I didn't have money when we were 28 years old. I mean, we didn't. But what we're seeing here is the heart for giving, the propensity for giving. That's there. The money will catch up in due time.
Yeah.
As they have more margin, as they begin to, their kids begin to get out of school, and the burden of being a younger family begins to wear off. They'll have more. The propensity is there, and that's what I think most people weren't prepared to see.
So I want to push in on that just a little bit. Why? What led church leaders across America to think that this generation, this younger generation, millennials, were not giving to the local church? What narrative? What was coming up? And I'm going completely off script here. And but why do you think they formed that perception to begin with?
Frank, it starts with they're not giving to my church. So if they're not giving to your church, then you begin to take and extrapolate that as a universal opinion, right? Well, the not giving to your church might be related to how your church messages to the next generation.
Okay.
So if you're using all boomer language and you're expecting that your millennials are going to respond to that, why would you think that? There's no reason for that, right? And the differences are not big, but there is nuance. There's ways that you would say that, ways that you would express it. And frankly, a lot about how, we'll talk about this on another podcast, but a lot of how we talk about giving in the church is so outdated anyway. It's in a time warp. It's all transactional. It's not transformational, and I don't like transactional giving. And I know when younger givers hear it, they don't like transactional giving. They want to be transformed by it. They want to see the people that they give to be transformed. And the churches that we're in are just notorious for not doing that well. So I think that's what you see it. You think, well, they're not giving to my church, and it allows you to extrapolate that and say, well, they're not giving to any churches. And that's just not true.
That's just fantastic insight. Fantastic insight, Jim.
Right.
Here's the deal. This conversation today isn't about giving, but we know that giving is a great indicator for someone's participation and heart and passion, right? So we talked about earlier that this boomer church was created for boomers, and we've got to make some changes and iterations.
Right.
I don't think that the boomers are going to be the one that fix the church to recraft it. They've got to give permission to a younger group of leaders to help shape that and inform that, right? I mean, they're not going to come up with it themselves, right? That's logical.
Totally.
It's hard sometimes, okay? I'm just being honest with you, to sit in a room with leaders, and I've got all peers, or I tend to be in rooms with older leaders, okay? So we're all sitting around a room together, solving the world's problems, to invite that younger leader, fresh out of college or whatever, to the table, to invite them to inform significant change. That's a hard thing to do, to invite them in and have them express ideas that we're uncomfortable with, ideas that are like, well, that's not how we would prefer it, and take action on them. Because first of all, oftentimes they're not in the room to begin with. That's a problem. And or if they are in the room, they're outnumbered. It's a disproportionate older generation, and we got the one token young person in there to make sure that we don't do anything crazy. So how does a church embrace or shift practically? Like, how do you make room for a younger generation and let them start to take action and not just sit and listen?
Well, I think there's two things, Frank, I think that it starts with. It starts with a shift in mindset.
Okay.
You've got to decide that the way that things are going is not sustainable for the long term. And for us to fix that, it starts now. One of the things, you and I both know this about leadership, one of the things that leaders have to do is fix things before they appear to be fully broken. They have to fix things before they appear to be fully broken, and it gets us in trouble sometimes. And because we're ahead of, we can see things that are broken and others don't see it, and we get criticized, and we just have to go home and put our heads down and say, look, I know 3 years from now they're going to thank me for this decision. Or I don't know. I'm 98% confident. Yeah, I hope so. We've had those moments, right? But I know this is not sustainable. And churches have to learn to do that. And the problem with church is that we are just notoriously myopic. We can see what's right here and we can't see what's out there down the road. And so it starts with a mindset shift of recognizing that my model is not sustainable for the long term. Second thing is you have to have respect for people whose viewpoint is different, maybe very different than yours, especially generational viewpoints, right? Yeah. And so what it's easy to come in to let the 26-year-old with all these crazy thoughts come into the room and just say, when he leaves, what does he know?
Right.
What does he know? That's that mindset shift. What you've got to do is to say, what is it that he knows that we don't know about the coming generation? Yeah. It's like in rooms, we sit and talk to the people who are just like us and then wonder why we can't communicate with the people who are not like us, whether it be younger generations. I mean, frankly, if I was pastoring a church, that'd be a scary thought, by the way. No comments there, Frank. Just leave that one alone. Leave it alone. Let it go. If I was pastoring a church, I would have regular roundtables with people who are not like me, including unchurched people. I would ask unchurched people, I would ask them to come in and be a focus group for me on a Sunday morning and tell me why my church doesn't work for them. Yeah. Right? And we don't do that because we're trying to program and make church based on what we see and think in the room. And the problem for all of us is we can only see what we see. It's kind of like smelling your own deodorant. At some point, you don't realize that you're even wearing it. Everybody else is wearing the same stuff. And a little bit of a Southern, type.
I got you.
You follow.
I got you. I'm picking it up.
I got you. Up. But it's the mindset shift. What we're doing is not going to work long term, and the respect for someone much younger than you and their viewpoint that they could be right on some stuff. Yeah. They could very well be right on some stuff about the future because they've got a lot longer view into the future, a lot longer run into the future than you do.
Yeah, and it's okay to vet those leaders' thoughts. So if you invite a couple of young leaders into a room, so let's say you have 7 leaders in a room, a couple of them are from a younger generation, and they get really fired up and they kind of feed off an idea together. And clearly they're passionate about a change in the way something is done. That doesn't mean that we need to go and take radical action on that idea today. Right. It means let's explore that further. And that may mean getting some more people from that generation together. That's right. How do we test this? How do we do it? And so what happens is sometimes we can hear that passion showing out because somebody's really passionate about a change in worship style or the arts or whatever it is. Wait.
People are passionate about changes in worship styles. That's not a news break here today, is it?
Breaking news on the next Sunday podcast. But when somebody throws that out there, it's easy to dismiss that as though that's what they're passionate about. Correct. They're really passionate about music. Correct. Well, no. Let's go explore that further. And so part of the action steps is, first of all, let somebody younger in the room. And then when they throw out ideas, instead of being completely dismissive, you don't have to go to the extreme the other way and just accept whatever they say because they are still young and they're still going to make mistakes and there's going to be things that we shouldn't do. But we should at least make room to explore that further. And that feels like there's this dumb dichotomy that's out there that there's only 2 choices. Either fully take whatever they say and go run after it based on one leader's idea, that's right, or dismiss it. Yep. And the reality is it's going, okay, they've highlighted that a couple times. I've heard that a few times. Let's explore that further with other leaders that are younger. And so right now we put it in one of 2 categories. There's a third that's very practical to go, let's go explore this further. Let's get some other people groups together. Let's get some focus groups together. Let's talk about this a little bit more. And then that leader that's got to create a little bit of chaos, got to look ahead, create a little conflict, can be a little more confident because they've been able to assess that with a group and not just took the idea of the one guy the one time that seemed really fired up, and hopefully that works.
Exactly. Well, here's the thing too, Frank. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention this because I'm passionate about this one as well. Is you got to make sure you have some women in the room, right?
Oh, that's fair.
And one of the things that we are notorious for is we get a bunch of men and maybe one token woman in the room. That's just not going to work. Yeah. So you got to have generational diversity. If you have ethnic diversity in your community, bring that into the room. Bring gender diversity into the room. And then maybe if you're part of the traditional, maybe the legacy team, say the boomers who are trying to figure out how to hand it off to the others, as you listen to these voices, filter it through 4 questions, right? It's the same thing that I would say to people when they would go to conferences. Be careful that you're not just taking everything home and not filtering it through your lens. So what did we hear? What did we hear from these people who were in the room, right? What do we think it means when they say these things? What do we think it means to us? And then what would be our actionable steps if we acted on any of this, right? So think about that, right? So that's your filter, and that allows you to process that. Yep. hopefully objectively. We all have generational bias at some point, and try to keep generational bias as much as you can out the door while you're processing these things. And if you get the right voices in the room, there's a really good chance if you ask those questions, what did we hear? Mm-hmm. What does it mean? What does it mean to us, mm-hmm. In our context? And then what would we do about that?
That's so good. You talked about this generational bias. I have a cure I'm going to share with you for generational bias. Are you ready for this?
I don't have my notepad here, but this is recorded,
get ready for
so
this. This is important. It's important.
I can get it.
A cure for generational bias for the local church. Have a in-depth relationship with somebody from another generation. Yeah. When you know them personally and you see what they're struggling with in their young marriage or their finances or whatever, suddenly the filter comes off. The posture changes when you're in relationship, and it's not just they're a guest in a leadership meeting and I don't know them. I don't know what they're going through or anything like that. That's right. You start to hear their passions. Totally. You start to hear why it matters so much that they're locking in and they keep repeating the same thing over and over again. Otherwise, it feels like they're just uneducated or ill-equipped, or they can't discuss other things. It's like, why do they keep going back to this one thing? It's like they're tone deaf. They're not hearing. We're not even talking about that right now. Yeah. But when you're in relationship and like truly connecting and you're in the mess with them and you're navigating the hard stuff as well with those young leaders. So if we're inviting younger leaders to the table, how are those boomers and other leaders mentoring and investing? Not a mentorship from the standpoint of, I know more than you, so you sit and listen and bring a notepad, but more of like, tell me what's going on. Mm-hmm. What are you navigating? And how do you, one of the great things that I believe you can do with younger leaders is to ask them, you said you're navigating something. What are you currently doing to fix it? Yeah. And when they respond, then you're vetting that instead of being prescriptive and say, oh, you're struggling with your marriage. Here's what I want you to do. Yeah, I want you to do this. Whoa, wait. Yeah. Okay, you're struggling. What are you trying to do? What's working? What's not working? Well, I thought I was doing this. Oh, okay. I think you got it right. Just tweak it just a little bit. Now I understand where they're coming from. And so I think if we want to eliminate that tension, if we're actually going to hear another generation, we have to care and be in relationship with those leaders to empower them, because the reality is the purse strings and the influence for most churches is still with the boomers.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
And we have to find a way to hand it off, but we have to be responsible. I'm not going to give my entire investment portfolio to my current group of millennials, the 4 that are in my household, and be like, yeah, I'm sure you'll do great with this. That would be irresponsible. Right. But if Isaac keeps getting passionate about crypto and having conversations with me, first of all, it's an opportunity for me to connect with him relationally.
Big time.
And
big time.
Second of all, it's something to go, okay, well, tell me more about it. Why are you thinking that? That's right. Even if we use some small amount of dollars or we explore this or whatever, let's go for it. Let's have some fun. Suddenly, I hear you. I'm not going to take everything I've got and go buy Bitcoin today. I'm not going to do it. I'm not that would be irresponsible. But
he might do that.
That's exactly right. So I can't give him the whole purse strings. Right. But at the same time, it's like, let's explore that further and connect.
Yeah. So here's part of what I think is the big, I'm going to say secret, but it's not that much of a secret. Some of the people that I'm mentoring may not realize this, but you've got to go in, you have to do that, Frank, and you have to be prepared for the fact that you're mentoring them and they're mentoring you. Yeah. And if you're not going to do that, you're going to miss way over half of what's happening in that. I mean, I'm different than I was 5 or 6 years ago when I started hanging around with all these, right? I can relate to them better. It's more natural for me. They've sanded off some rough edges for me. Right. They've helped me with some things that I think were innately kind of embedded in me. But as I kind of spend more time with them and they're reverse mentoring me as I'm mentoring them, we're both getting something out of that. Right? Yeah. And most of them don't even realize that.
Oh, that's so good.
I mean, I'm going to be out in Colorado with 60 young leaders next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
So incredible.
Right. And it blows my mind just coming back to process everything, how they're reverse mentoring me when I'm in there and around them. Right. And that's a part of what the mindset shift that I'm talking about, Frank, is you can't go into it thinking, well, I'm just going to help these people figure out all the stuff that I already know and I'll save them a lot of time. That's not what's happening here. That's not the mindset. Yeah. It's I want to invest in a relationship that's going to help them and then it's going to help me.
That's great. Right. That is and most next Sunday.
They don't even know that. They don't even know that.
I love it. I love that perspective. I think like from the conversation we've had today, this is fantastic, Jim. Thank you for sharing your heart and your passion for this next generation. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. This is so much fun.
And here's the other thing too, Fred. Just one more thought before we jump out of here is underneath all of this, because generosity is kind of my life calling and generous and everything else, embedded in all of that is my opportunity to speak generosity into them, even when they don't realize I'm doing it, even when they don't realize I'm doing it, right? Because I want them to be more generous than I was when I was their age.
Yeah.
And so that's what's the fun part as well.
That is so good. I love this. Hey, listen, we're going to do more of these. I hope you'll keep me around and
next
we can
Sunday?
keep this
We're
around.
Another one next Sunday?
Next Sunday. This is going on. This is fun. I really think this will be a great way to serve leaders and church leaders. So, hey, listen, if you haven't already checked this out, be sure to share it with a friend. Subscribe if you don't mind. Help us get the word out. We're just trying to share and hopefully need some leaders. From time to time, we're going to have some guests on the show that are going to help give some insight because we are not always just going to talk about other generations or talk about how you should have women in the room. We'll probably have some ladies in the room from time to time to give their perspective along the way. We do know a few great leaders. Yes, and so we're looking forward to it. Until then, hope you have a gret week, and we'll see you on next Sunday. Next.